The sound wasn't just a crack, it was a thunderclap in a clear blue sky. The sharp, ugly noise of a hand striking flesh cut through the din of the Dry Creek train depot. Hank Xavier's head snapped up. His eyes, narrowed under the brim of a weathered Stetson, locked onto a woman stumbling backward. She was a delicate thing, all lace and good breeding, and she nearly crumpled to the wooden planks of the platform. It was 1879, the Arizona Territory. Hank had seen men die for less than a crooked card game. Violence was the air they breathed out here. But this was different. A man in a tailored suit hitting a lady in broad daylight. It lit a fuse in him that burned past all common sense. Before his mind could catch up, his boots were moving. He wove through the startled crowd, a hawk diving on its prey. The woman was on her feet, a hand pressed to a cheek already blooming red. The man, her attacker, raised his hand to strike again. His mouth twisted into a snarl. "You embarrass me for the last time." The words died in his throat. Hank's hand, hard as iron from years of ranch work, clamped around the man's wrist. He squeezed, and the man's face went from red to a pasty white. "That's enough." Hank's voice was low, a gravelly rumble that promised worse to come. He didn't release his grip. He didn't even look at the man. His eyes were on the woman, on her wide, terrified eyes, on the small trickle of blood at the corner of her mouth. And in that split second, Hank Xavier made a choice that would tear his world apart. He pulled the woman behind him, a human shield. He didn't ask, he just acted. "My apologies for the delay, darling," he said, his voice booming across the platform for all to hear. "I see you've had the misfortune of running into this gentleman." He turned a gaze as cold as a winter night back to the man whose wrist he still held. "I suggest you move along now," Hank said, his voice dropping again. "This lady is my bride, and I don't take kindly to anyone putting their hands on her." The world seemed to hold its breath. The woman stiffened behind him. Hank expected her to protest, to call him a liar, to run. But she didn't. She leaned into him, just a fraction. Her voice was a bare whisper, meant only for his ears. "Thank you," she breathed. But there was something else in her voice besides gratitude. Something that sounded a lot like fear. Not fear of the man in the suit. Fear of him. The well-dressed man finally found his voice, sputtering with rage. "This is none of your concern, Cowboy. Hannah is my fiancée, and I'll thank you to unhand her." Hannah. So that was her name. He could feel her trembling against his back. He tightened his protective hold, a silent promise. "Seems the lady doesn't share your view," Hank replied, his voice dangerously calm. "And it became my concern when you decided to use her face for target practice." A crowd was gathering now, their murmurs a low hum of disapproval aimed at the man in the suit. The station master was pushing his way through, his face a mask of concern. "Problem here?" the station master asked, his eyes darting between them. The man, Theodore Wilkes, opened his mouth to speak, but Hank cut him off. "No problem," Hank said smoothly. "Just collecting my bride. We'll be on our way." He looked down at Hannah. Her eyes were a swirl of confusion, terror, and something else he couldn't quite name. Hope? No, it was colder than that. It was calculation. What had he just stepped into? "You're making a grave mistake," Theodore hissed, his voice low and venomous. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'm Theodore Wilkes, of the Boston Wilkes family. A single telegram from me can erase you from this territory." A slow, cold smile spread across Hank's face. "And I'm Hank Xavier," he said. "Of nowhere you've ever heard of. Out here, Mr. Wilkes, your name is just dust in the wind." He didn't wait for a reply. With a gentle but firm hand on Hannah's back, he guided her away. She moved like a sleepwalker at first, her body rigid. But as they walked away from Theodore, her steps became more sure, more urgent. As they reached the edge of the platform, she whispered, her voice tight, "My luggage." He looked down at her. Her eyes weren't looking at him. They were scanning the crowd, searching for something, or someone. "Wait here," he said, guiding her to a bench. He strode back, grabbed her trunk and valise, and had a porter wheel them out. He loaded them onto his wagon, 1,000 questions burning in his mind. He glanced back at the platform. Theodore was still there, a statue of pure hatred, his eyes promising a reckoning. But that wasn't what chilled Hank's blood. Just behind a stack of crates, he saw a man in a bowler hat give a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Not to Theodore, to Hannah, who, she gave a tiny shake of her head in return, a movement so small that if Hank hadn't been watching, he would have missed it entirely. Who was this woman? The ride to his ranch was thick with unspoken words. She sat beside him on the wagon bench, as rigid as a fence post. Her hands were folded in her lap, but he could see her knuckles were white. "I don't actually have a sister," he said, breaking the silence as they turned onto the dirt road leading to his property. The lie he'd told back at the station felt stupid and thin now. "My foreman's wife, Maria, lives in the second cabin," he continued. "She's a good woman. You'll be safe there." Hannah turned to look at him, and for the first time, a flicker of a genuine smile touched her lips. "I suspected as much. You don't have the face of a liar, Mr. Xavier." "Just Hank," he said, "and you're right. Lying's not my strong suit." Her smile faded. Her gaze became sharp, analytical. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "You don't know me. You made a powerful enemy back there." He thought about the man in the bowler hat. He thought about the secret signal. "Where I come from, a man doesn't hit a woman," he said, giving her the simple answer. The one that was only half the truth. She touched her cheek, where the bruise was now a dark purple shadow. "No," she said softly. "He doesn't." They rode in silence for another minute before she spoke again, her voice formal. "I'm Hannah Summers. I suppose I should introduce myself to my supposed husband." The words were a test, a question hidden inside a statement. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Summers," he replied, keeping his own voice level. "Sorry about the bride business. Seemed like the quickest way to end things." "It was effective," she said, turning her attention to his approaching ranch. It wasn't much. A main house, 2 small cabins, a barn, honest and plain, just like him. Or so he tried to be. As they pulled up, a stocky woman with kind eyes and strong hands came out of one of the cabins, wiping flour on her apron. "Maria." "Senor Hank," she called out. "We did not expect you back so soon." Her eyes fell on Hannah, and her smile faltered for just a second. Surprise, and something else. Recognition. "Maria, this is Miss Hannah Summers," Hank said, helping Hannah down. "She'll be staying for a bit, in the spare room." Maria's eyebrows shot up, but she recovered quickly. "Of course, señorita. Come, you must be tired." Hannah hesitated, looking back at Hank. "Thank you," she said, but her eyes were saying something else entirely. They were saying, "We are not done here." He watched her disappear inside, then stood by the wagon for a long time, the setting sun casting long twisted shadows across the ground. He hadn't just saved a damsel in distress. He'd just invited a storm into his home. And he had a sinking feeling he was about to be caught in the eye of it. The first 2 days were a lie, a carefully constructed play of normalcy. Hannah helped Maria in the kitchen. She sat on the porch and sketched the mountains in a little leather-bound book. She was the perfect guest. Quiet, polite, grateful. Too perfect. Hank saw the way she watched the road, her body tensing every time a rider appeared in the distance. He saw how she never let the sketchbook out of her sight. He noticed how her questions about the ranch, about the town, about his neighbors, were never idle chatter. They were precise. She was gathering intelligence. He told himself he was just being cautious. He told himself it was his duty to protect her. But the truth was, he was fascinated and terrified. On the third night, the storm inside his house finally broke. He was woken from a shallow sleep by a sound, a floorboard creaking in the main house. He was instantly awake, his hand reaching for the Colt peacemaker he kept on his nightstand. He moved silently through his small cabin, his bare feet making no sound on the rough wood. He peered through the window toward the barn, and there she was, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows of the porch. It was Hannah. She was dressed in dark clothes, moving with a grace and purpose that he hadn't seen before. She wasn't taking a midnight stroll. She was running. He was out the door in a flash, cutting across the yard to intercept her before she reached the stables. He caught her just as her hand touched the latch on the barn door. He grabbed her arm. She let out a startled gasp and spun around, something glinting in her hand. A knife. She held it with a familiarity that chilled him to the bone. This was no city debutante. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his voice low and hard. Her eyes were wide in the moonlight, but not with fear, with fury. She was a cornered animal, ready to fight her way out. "Let go of me," she hissed. "Not until you tell me what's going on," he said, his grip tightening. "Who are you, Hannah? And what kind of trouble did you bring to my doorstep?" For a long moment, she just stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the warring calculations. Finally, with a sigh of defeat, her shoulders slumped. The knife clattered to the dusty ground. "My name is not Hannah Summers," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The confession hung in the cold night air between them. "And Theodore is not just my fiancé," she continued, her voice gaining a bitter strength. "He's my jailer." She wouldn't say more, not out there in the open. He led her back to the main house, to the kitchen, and lit a lamp. The warm glow pushed back the shadows, but it couldn't touch the coldness that had settled between them. He made coffee while she sat at the table, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale and drawn. He placed a steaming mug in front of her. "Start talking," he said. And so she did. Her real name was Clara Jensen. She was the daughter of a Boston shipping magnate who had done business with the Wilkes family. A lot of business, not all of it legal. Her father, she explained, had gotten in over his head. The Wilkes family didn't just deal in shipping. They dealt in blackmail, extortion, and smuggling. Her father had wanted out. But you don't just walk away from a family like the Wilkes. He ended up dead. The official report called it a tragic accident. Clara knew better. She had proof. Her father had kept a secret ledger, detailing every dirty deal, every bribe, every crime. "Theodore wasn't supposed to marry me," she said, her hands trembling around the mug. "He was supposed to control me. The engagement was a sham, the guardianship document I signed when my father died. I thought it was to protect my inheritance. It was to give him legal authority over my life, to keep me from ever speaking to the authorities." She had found the ledger, hidden in a secret compartment in her father's desk, just a month ago. She knew it was her only chance, her only weapon. She had planned her escape for weeks. The trip to San Francisco was her opportunity. She was supposed to meet a federal agent at the Dry Creek Depot, the man in the bowler hat. But Theodore had been watching her. He grew suspicious. The slap on the platform wasn't about being embarrassed. It was a warning. A message to her contact that she was compromised. "When you stepped in," she said, finally looking at him, "you ruined everything. But you also saved my life. I think he would have killed me on that train." Hank leaned back in his chair, the pieces clicking into place. The strange tension at the station, her constant vigilance. The knife. The ledger, he said. Where is it? She looked at him, her eyes searching his for a long moment. Then she reached for the sketchbook that was never far from her side. It looked like a simple artist's portfolio, but it was a fake. She pried the leather cover open along a hidden seam. Inside, tucked between thin sheets of wood, was a small black ledger book. The proof. Just as the enormity of what she held in her hands settled over them, a frantic banging on the front door shattered the silence. It was Maria. Her face was as white as a ghost. "Senor Hank," she panted, holding up a wrinkled newspaper. "I knew I recognized her. I'm so sorry. I did not realize until I found this old paper from my cousin in St. Louis." Her finger trembled as she pointed to a small article on the back page. The headline read, "Boston Heiress Vanishes Amidst Rumors of Foul Play." Beneath it was a crude sketch, a drawing of a woman with wide, haunted eyes. It was a perfect likeness of the woman sitting at his kitchen table. And right below the sketch, in bold letters, it offered a reward of $5,000 for any information leading to her whereabouts. A reward offered by her concerned fiancé, Mr. Theodore Wilkes. They weren't just hiding a witness. They were hiding a fugitive with a price on her head. And the whole world was looking for her. The newspaper changed everything. It wasn't just Theodore's wounded pride they had to worry about anymore. It was every bounty hunter, every greedy soul from here to the Mississippi who could read a paper and recognize a face. $5,000 could make a man forget all about right and wrong. "We have to go," Clara said, her voice tight with urgency as she shoved the ledger back into its hiding place. "Now!" "Go where?" Hank shot back, his mind racing. "They're looking for you, for this face." He tapped the drawing in the paper. "Riding off in the middle of the night is the surest way to get caught." He started pacing the kitchen, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He was a rancher. He knew cattle. He knew the land. He knew how to fix a broken fence. He didn't know how to hide a woman from a criminal empire with bottomless pockets. "They'll be watching the roads," he thought aloud. "The train stations. Every town for 100 miles." The world had suddenly shrunk, its walls closing in on them. His small, quiet ranch had become a prison. The next few days were a special kind of hell. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every distant rider was a potential bounty hunter. The simple peace of his ranch was gone, replaced by a constant, gnawing tension. Hank moved Clara from the main house to his more secluded cabin, telling Maria it was for her own safety. He and his foreman, a stoic man named Ricardo, took turns standing watch through the night. During the day, Hank tried to teach Clara how to be someone else. He had her tie her honey-brown hair up under a dull bonnet. He gave her one of Maria's plain, homespun dresses to wear. He even tried to teach her to shoot, but her hands trembled so badly she couldn't hold the pistol steady. She was a bird with a broken wing, and he was trying to teach it to fly in a hurricane. One afternoon, desperate for a moment of peace, he took her to a hidden spot on his land, a small waterfall cascading into a clear, cold pool surrounded by cottonwood trees. "No one comes up here," he said, hoping the sound of the water would wash away some of the fear. For a little while it worked. She took out her sketchbook, the real one this time, and began to draw, her face losing some of its tightness as she focused on capturing the light on the water. He watched her, this impossible woman who had turned his life upside down. This city girl who held a deadly secret and faced it with a courage he was only just beginning to understand. "You're very talented," he said quietly. She looked up, a faint blush on her cheeks. "My father wanted me to learn painting," she said. "Theodore said it was an unsuitable hobby for a future wife." "Seems to me a lady ought to decide for herself what's suitable," Hank grumbled. Her pencil stilled. "I used to think so too," she said, her voice dropping. before I learned how costly independence can be for a woman alone. You're not alone now, Hank said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted. The world fell away, and it was just the two of them by the water, the rancher and the fugitive. A man who wanted a quiet life, and a woman who had never known one. A spark jumped between them, silent and powerful. It was broken by the snap of a twig. Hank was on his feet in an instant, his hand on his Colt. He pushed Clara behind him, his body shielding hers. Two men stepped out from the trees. They weren't cowboys. They were city men, dressed in dark suits that looked out of place in the rugged canyon. They held pistols in their hands, aimed right at him. "Well, well," the first man said with a slick, cruel smile. "Look what we found. Mr. Wilkes sends his regards." They were trapped. The waterfall was at their back, and two guns were in front of them. There was nowhere to run. "Give us the girl, Cowboy," the second man said, his voice flat and businesslike. "And the book. Mr. Wilkes knows she has it. Do that, and we might just let you live." Hank's mind was a whirlwind. He could try to draw, but they had the drop on him. He'd be dead before his gun cleared the holster. And then they would take Clara. And what they would do to her. He couldn't let himself think about it. He saw a flicker of movement behind the men. It was Ricardo. He must have followed them. He was moving silently through the trees, a hunting rifle in his hands. He was trying to get a clear shot. Hank needed to buy him time. "The book," Hank said, playing dumb. "I don't know what you're talking about." The first man laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Don't play games. We know she has her father's ledger. Hand it over." Suddenly, Clara stepped out from behind Hank. Her face was pale, but her eyes were blazing. "You'll have to kill me first," she said, her voice ringing with a strength that stunned him. The first man's smile widened. "That can be arranged." He took a step forward, raising his pistol. And in that moment, Hank knew what he had to do. He couldn't let Ricardo take the shot. If there was a gunfight, Clara could be hit in the crossfire. He shoved Clara backward, hard. "Get in the water," he yelled. Then he dove sideways, pulling his Colt as he hit the ground, rolling behind a large boulder. A shot rang out, chipping stone just inches from his head. He fired back, not aiming to hit, but to make them take cover. He heard a splash behind him as Clara hit the pool. Another shot whizzed past his ear. He was pinned down. He risked a glance over the rock. The two men were advancing, using the trees for cover. Ricardo was still trying to get into position. It wasn't going to be enough. Then he saw it. A small bluff overlooking the trail the men were on. If he could get there. It was a crazy idea. A suicide run. "Clara!" he yelled. "When I move, you run. Don't look back." He didn't wait for her answer. He took a deep breath, whispered a prayer, and burst from behind the cover, running low and fast, firing as he went. He was a blur of motion, a desperate gamble against impossible odds. He heard the roar of their guns, felt the wind of a bullet whip past his face. Then came a searing, white-hot pain in his shoulder. His arm went numb. His pistol fell from his suddenly useless hand. He stumbled, his momentum carrying him forward a few more feet before he collapsed in the dirt. The last thing he saw before the world went black was the two men standing over him, their guns aimed at his head. And behind them, he saw Clara, scrambling out of the water, her face a mask of pure horror. He had failed. Pain was the first thing he knew, a dull, throbbing fire in his shoulder. The second was a voice, low and angry. "Told you not to damage him too much. Wilkes wants to talk to him." Hank forced his eyes open. He was lying on the ground, his hands tied tightly behind his back. His head was pounding, and his shoulder felt like it had been branded. The two hired guns were standing over him, and sitting on a rock nearby, looking as calm as if she were at a Sunday picnic, was Clara. Her sketchbook, the fake one with the ledger inside, was in her lap. She wasn't tied up. She wasn't a prisoner. A cold dread, worse than any bullet wound, washed over him. "What?" he managed to croak, his throat dry as dust. Clara looked at him. Her expression was unreadable. There was no fear in her eyes, no relief, just a cold, hard clarity. "I'm sorry, Hank," she said, her voice even. There was no other way. The first gunman chuckled. "Your girlfriend's a smart one, Cowboy. She knows which side her bread is buttered on. Made a deal." "A deal?" The word echoed in Hank's skull. He looked at Clara, at the ledger in her lap, at the gunman standing relaxed and confident. It was a setup, all of it, from the moment she stepped out from behind him. "The ledger," Hank rasped. "For my life." Clara shook her head. "Not just for your life," she said. She stood up and walked over to him, looking down at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. Pity. Regret. She knelt beside him. "Theodore is a monster," she whispered, her voice so low the other men couldn't hear. "But his father is worse. The Wilkes family. They don't just ruin people, they own them. My father was their property, and when he died, I became theirs." She leaned closer. Her breath was warm on his cheek. "I'm giving them the ledger," she whispered. "But I made a copy, a few key pages, enough to interest the right people. I sent it with Ricardo when he slipped away during the gunfight." Hank stared at her, his mind struggling to keep up. "A copy. Ricardo." "But that wasn't the deal I made for you," she continued, her voice hardening slightly. "Theodore is coming here. He wants the original ledger, and he wants the man who interfered. He wants to make an example of you." The cold dread returned, colder this time. "So you just handed me over?" he asked, the bitterness tasting like ash in his mouth. "I bought us time," she corrected him. "Ricardo is riding for the U.S. Marshals in Prescott, but that's a 2-day ride, and Theodore will be here in less than an hour." She had traded the real ledger and his life for a chance. A slim, desperate chance that help would arrive before Theodore was finished with him. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a sacrifice. And he was the lamb. The sound of approaching horses announced Theodore's arrival. He rode into the clearing like a king returning to his castle, flanked by 4 more hard-faced men. He dismounted and strode over to Clara, ignoring Hank completely. He took the sketchbook from her, his eyes greedy. He opened the false cover and pulled out the small black book. A triumphant smile spread across his face as he flipped through the pages. "Excellent, my dear," he said, his voice slick with satisfaction. "You see how much easier things are when you cooperate?" He then turned his attention to Hank, his smile turning into a cruel sneer. "And now for the cowboy," he said. "Who thought he could play the hero?" He walked over and kicked Hank hard in the ribs. Pain exploded in his chest, and he gasped for air. "Get him on his feet," Theodore ordered. 2 of his men hauled Hank up, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest. He sagged between them, his vision swimming. "You have something that belongs to me," Theodore said, his face just inches from Hank's. "My fiancée. You filled her head with foolish ideas of freedom. I'm here to correct that." He drew a long, slender knife from his belt. "I'm not going to kill you, Xavier. Not yet. I'm going to carve you up, piece by piece. I want her to watch. I want her to understand what happens to people who defy me." He pressed the tip of the knife to Hank's cheek. Hank looked past him at Clara. Her face was a pale, emotionless mask, but her eyes were screaming. This was it, the end of the line. Ricardo was too far away. The marshals would be too late. He closed his eyes, bracing for the cut. But it never came. Instead, he heard a sharp, metallic click, the sound of a rifle hammer being cocked. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mr. Wilkes." The voice was new. It came from the trees, calm and authoritative. Hank's eyes snapped open. Theodore froze, the knife still against Hank's skin. Everyone turned toward the voice. Stepping out of the woods was a man. He was tall and weathered, with a graying mustache and the coldest blue eyes Hank had ever seen. He wore the dusty coat of a long-distance rider, but on his chest was a small silver star, a U.S. Marshal. And behind him, stepping out from every tree and rock, were a dozen more armed men. They had the clearing surrounded. Theodore's face went from triumph to disbelief, to pure, unadulterated terror. "How?" he stammered. "You couldn't have gotten here this fast." The Marshal smiled, a grim, humorless expression. "We didn't have to ride from Prescott, son," he said. "We've been watching you for weeks." He gestured with his rifle toward Clara. "Miss Jensen here has been working with us ever since she left Boston, feeding us information, setting a trap." He looked directly at Hank. "Her message from the depot just confirmed it was time to spring it. You, Mr. Xavier, were the bait. The entire rescue, the intervention at the station, her fear, her flight, her capture. It was all a lie, a beautifully orchestrated, brutally effective lie. Clara hadn't been a witness running for her life. She was an agent, a hunter, using herself as bait to draw the whole Wilkes organization into a trap far from their seat of power in Boston. She hadn't stumbled into Hank's life by accident. She had chosen him. The man in the bowler hat wasn't her contact. He was her handler. Her nod to him at the station wasn't a signal of distress. It was a confirmation. The plan is in motion. Hank had thought he was the hero of the story, the protector. He was just a pawn, a piece she had moved on the board to force Theodore's hand. His wound, his capture, his near death. It was all an acceptable risk in her much larger game. The Marshal and his men disarmed Theodore's crew with practiced efficiency. Theodore himself stood frozen, his face a mask of utter ruin as he realized the depth of his miscalculation. The lead marshal, whose name was Clayton, walked over to where Hank was still being held. "Cut him loose," he ordered. As the ropes fell away, Hank staggered, catching himself before he fell. He clutched his bleeding shoulder, the physical pain nothing compared to the sting of the revelation. Clara approached him, her face finally showing a flicker of emotion. Regret. "Hank, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice low. "I never wanted you to get hurt. I tried to keep you out of it. But when you stepped in at the station, I had to adapt the plan. I used you. It was the only way to ensure we got all of them." He stared at her, this woman of 1,000 faces, the frightened victim, the determined survivor, the cold-blooded strategist. Who was the real Clara Jensen? "Everything," he asked, his voice rough. "Was any of it real?" Before she could answer, Marshal Clayton clapped a hand on his good shoulder. "This woman is a hero, son. She's about to bring down one of the biggest criminal outfits on the East Coast, the things her father's ledger details. It's going to put dozens of powerful men behind bars." He handed Hank a canteen. "We had men watching your ranch from the moment you arrived. We would have stepped in if it got too out of hand." Too out of hand. A bullet in his shoulder and a knife to his throat apparently didn't qualify. They led the prisoners away, a sullen, defeated column of men who had woken up that morning thinking they ruled the world. The clearing was suddenly quiet again, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the distant cascade of the waterfall. It was just Hank and Clara. "I'm not a hero," she said softly, answering the Marshal's earlier comment. "I'm just a daughter, trying to get justice for her father." She looked at him, her eyes pleading for understanding. "The time at your ranch, watching you, talking with you. That was real, Hank. The way you stood up for me, a complete stranger. That was the only part of this whole mess that wasn't a lie." She reached out and gently touched his wounded arm. "When this is over, I have to go back to testify." The unspoken question hung between them. What happens after? "Dry Creek will still be here," he said, the words feeling inadequate. She gave him a small, sad smile. "There's a reward for my capture, remember?" she said. $5,000. Marshal Clayton said it's technically yours. You brought me in a manner of speaking. The idea was absurd. A payment for having his life ripped apart. "I don't want their money," he said, his voice flat. "I know," she whispered. She took a step closer, raised herself on her toes, and gently kissed his cheek. "Thank you, Hank Xavier, for being the one good man I've met in all of this." And then she turned and walked away, following the marshals, leaving him alone by the waterfall with his pain, his confusion, and the ghost of a woman who had never truly existed. 6 months later, life on the ranch had returned to something resembling normal. Hank's shoulder had healed, leaving a puckered scar and a permanent ache when the weather turned cold. He worked from sunup to sundown, trying to sweat out the memory of Clara Jensen. But she was a stubborn ghost. He'd see her on the porch where she used to sketch. He'd hear her laugh in the sound of the wind through the cottonwoods. He had taken the $5,000 reward, not for himself, but to buy the adjacent plot of land, expanding his ranch, building something solid and real to fight the phantom memories. He followed the story in the papers that made their way to Dry Creek. The Wilkes trial was a sensation back east. One by one, powerful men were indicted, their careers and reputations destroyed by the evidence in a small black ledger. Clara Jensen's name was on everyone's lips, the brave daughter who had avenged her father. Then one day the story stopped. The trial was over. The Wilkes family was ruined. And Clara vanished from the news. He told himself it was for the best. She was part of a world he could never understand, a world of wealth and secrets and lies. He was a simple man who believed in the truth of the land under his feet. One hot afternoon in late summer, he was mending a fence on the far edge of his new property when he saw a wagon approaching on the main road. It wasn't a rancher's wagon. It was a smart, polished carriage, the kind you saw back in the city. He watched it, his heart starting a slow, heavy drumbeat in his chest. The carriage pulled to a stop. The door opened, and she stepped out. She was dressed differently, in a simple but elegant traveling dress, her hair tied back simply. The haunted look was gone from her eyes. She looked peaceful. She walked toward him, stopping a few feet from the fence line. "Hello, Hank," she said, her voice as clear as he remembered. "Clara," he said, the name feeling strange on his tongue. "I came to see what you did with the blood money," she said, a small smile playing on her lips as she gestured to the rolling hills behind him. "It's good land," he said, his hands gripping the fence post. "It'll be good for grazing." An awkward silence fell between them, the silence of two people who had been through a war together and didn't know how to speak in peacetime. "The trial is over," she said finally. "They're all in prison. It's done." "I read about it," he said. "You did what you set out to do." "Yes," she said. She looked down at her hands. "I have my father's house back, my inheritance. I have everything I'm supposed to want." She looked up at him, and her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "But it's all empty, Hank. It's just a place. It's not a home." He remained silent, his heart a painful knot in his chest. "I kept thinking about this place," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "About the quiet, about watching the sunset from the porch. I kept thinking about a man who was willing to risk his life for a stranger, a man who called me his bride to save my honor." She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. I don't know if you can ever forgive me for what I did, for how I used you, but I had to come back and ask. She looked at him, her heart in her eyes. Is the offer still open? She whispered. For the stranger you met at the depot? He looked at this woman, this beautiful, complicated, dangerous woman. His mind screamed at him to run. She was trouble. She was a storm. But his heart had been waiting for the rain. A slow smile spread across his face. Well, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I reckon my bride has been gone long enough. It's time she came home. He opened the gate, and she ran into his arms. And this time there were no secrets, no lies, no plans. There was just the truth of two people who had found each other in the midst of chaos and held on. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was something real, forged in violence and betrayal. But as he held her under the vast Arizona sky, Hank knew their future would be built on something much stronger. A truth they would make for themselves, one day at a time. If you enjoyed this story, you know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, and don't forget to ring the bell so you don't miss the next one.